And probably most of you in the audience know John, at least by reputation, but how many of you have read his great book, Hegarty on Advertising, Turning Intelligence into Magic? Show of hands, please. Too few, too few. Apart from being a really good story and an inspiring handbook for industry, John's book introduced me to a new word, viticulture, the science, production, and study of grapes, because he's now a passionate viticulturalist. Is that right? I have. As well as running the global company, the global and highly successful creative agency that bears his name. So, ladies and gentlemen, Sir John Hegarty.
Thank you for that, that rather wonderful introduction. But I'm going to say quite a few things here. I don't necessarily think you have to agree with everything I say. I was recently described as a contrarian, which actually I had to go to the dictionary and look it up to make sure it wasn't insulting. And I actually quite liked it, really. But I'll give you some advice. First of all, whatever you do in life, do not buy a vineyard, all right? Whatever you do, do not buy a vineyard. It is the most brilliant way of losing money. So if any of you do drink my wine, realize you are drinking a subsidized product. That's the most important thing to say here. I'm going to, essentially, for me, this is all about pitching. Pitching is the bit that the agency does when the energy rises and everybody gets excited and, gosh, you know, it's, the adrenaline of advertising really comes to the fore. And there's one thing I will say about pitching, and John Bartle, my ex-partner, did, I know when we pitch, you know, when a pitch list is announced and everybody decides, all agencies decide, we want to go last. We want to go last because that's the best place to be, because that's when a client hears the final words of the pitch and you can make the final impression. And John Bartle did an analysis of all the pitches that we'd won and the ones that we'd lost. And there was absolutely no correlation between where we were on that pitch and whether we lost or not. So the first thing to say about pitching is don't worry where you are. That is not going to decide anything. And hopefully now I'm going to give you some tips that take you through that, that process. And, nope, I'm going to point that there. I'm going to point it, oh, I'm pressing the wrong thing. There it is. The first thing I say, and I actually do say this in this book, so those who've read it, well done, fantastic, is that, you know, I work in advertising, I don't live in advertising. I think the most fundamental thing you can be in winning a pitch is to be a really interesting person, because then people are going to want to engage with you. And, you know, the number of times, you know, I hear people just sort of talk about our business as though it's a sort of a world unto itself and that everything is about what we do as opposed to the world out there. And I say to all my creative people, I say, look, you know, there are lots of definitions of creativity, you know, but I rather like the one which says creativity is an expression of self, because we're all creative. We're all creative. Everybody's creative. Of course, some of us just earn our living by it. But in a sense, creativity you could describe as an expression of self. And therefore, the more interesting you are as a person, the more likely you're going to create interesting work. And that's fundamentally important. So, you know, I always say to everybody, I work in advertising, I really don't live in advertising. I don't want to live in advertising. I spent, you know, a number of years working in America when we opened our office there, and I kind of found it quite interesting, the difference between the UK, or even Europe, one could say, and the States. And I felt that advertising there lived in a little sort of, you know, bubble called advertising. It referred to other bits of advertising. And I think it did that because it was very, very difficult. People were always worried about upsetting somebody. You know, some ethnic group would be upset if you referred to the world outside. So it lives in this little echo world of advertising. And I spent my career trying to do work that is a part of social culture, that it gets out there and talks to people in a way which isn't like advertising, but actually talks to them in a way that's very interesting, hopefully. My next point, and I think this is in a way I could sort of stop after this really, and that, you know, as a company, you know, you've got to be a brand. We spend our lives advising clients on how to be a brand. And I think our industry is the most appalling at being a brand. We don't have brands in our industry. You know, we are all things to all people. And that's a nonsense. You cannot be that. You cannot do that. You have got to have some beliefs. If you don't have some beliefs, your work will just be sort of flaccid. You know, it won't be great. And the point about a brand is that it attracts certain people and not others. You know, if you want to buy a Ferrari, you don't go in and say, well, you know, I'd like to buy this Ferrari, but can you put a tow bar on it because I've got a caravan? You know, they'd show you the door and say, get out. I mean, you have to be excluding to do that. And when we started BBH, my God, back in 1982, yes, we decided, actually it was Nigel Bogle's idea, it wasn't my idea at all, that we weren't going to do speculative creative pitches. And we were pilloried by the industry for this. They thought this is just completely stupid and absolutely absurd. And we said, no, we are not going to do creative pitches because we value our creativity to such an extent that, you know, we aren't just going to give it away for nothing. And actually, we can't do it justice. What we can do is look at your problem and talk about the strategy, talk about where you should be. And as I say, we got criticized enormously for that from the rest of our industry, which I thought was rather absurd. I mean, all we were trying to do is be a brand. We were trying to create a difference. And I think the great thing about being a brand is if you believe in something, eventually it all comes round to you. It comes back to you. And it was about sort of 6 or 7 years after we had started, we were invited to pitch for this piece of business. And the client had released the list of agencies who were pitching. And he told us this because we did actually win the business. And he said he got a phone call from one of the agencies pitching and said, look, this is very unfair that you've got BBH on the list. And the client said, why? What's the problem? And they said, well, they're not going to they're not going to do any creative work for the pitch. And the client said, well, I haven't asked you to do it. You've assumed that you should do it. But suddenly this problem that we set out with, we weren't going to do speculative creative pitches, had become for us an advantage. But the point about that is that we were a brand. What we were doing, we were filtering those people coming to us. And that's what a great brand does. And that's why, in a way, you know, with John Bartle's analysis of our pitching, we were winning more pitches than losing them because by the time somebody had walked through our front door, they had a propensity to buy. They kind of wanted what we were about. They wanted what we were selling. And we had a point of view. Yes, we didn't pitch for we had no government business. Because if you pitched for a government piece of business, you had to have creative work, and we'd refused to do it. So we never got any government business. So there was a price to pay, but that's the point in all brands. All brands, if they're great, there is a price to pay. You cannot be all things to all people. And I think the other thing about a pitch is, you know, you don't buy something off somebody unless you actually trust them. You know, somebody once said to me about what do you look for in an account handler? And I said, somebody who can be trusted, because then a client might buy something off them. But in a way, what you're doing when you're pitching is it's like a relationship. You know, it's like, you know, you're taking somebody out and you want to woo them or whatever it is. That long-term relationships are based on those three things: truth, trust, and then you get love. So I suppose in a commercial relationship, truth, trust, and respect is what you can hope for. But unless you actually operate that, unless you have that at the very core of your company, you're not going to get believed, and you're not going to build a long-term relationship, which is what you're trying to do. And I think the reason I think that's very important is, and I think this is very true, in today's world, opinion is cheap. It's even free. It's the truth, the most valuable thing we possess that's expensive. So, be a brand, believe in something, and remember that, truth is fundamentally important, fundamental. And then the client will buy things off you if they believe in you. They won't if they don't believe in you. My next point is remember, you're solving the client's problems, not yours. And the number of times I've even heard it at BBH, when people, I can hear what they're saying, and in a way they're trying to manipulate the conversation around it. This is what we would like to do, as opposed to what's the client's problem? What are you trying to solve? And keeping an open mind to how you can actually do that. That to me is also absolutely crucial. And as I say, even when you're kind of you're selling a client something, or you're trying to get them to buy something. And I've always said to my creative people, you've got to learn to use words that they understand. Because if they understand the words, there's a possibility they think that you've listened to what they're saying, and therefore you might actually have a solution to their problem. I was saying earlier, actually, working in the States, one of the words I learned not to use in America is creativity. Do not, whatever you do, say creative, because they'll think, oh, I see. You mean you're going to do that edgy stuff? That was what, and that's fine for Nike or one of those other brands, but hey, that's not us. We're, General Mills or whatever it might be. And you had to find different words, and you had to find words like impactful and meaningful and, long-lasting. And all those things, you could find lots of different words, but you've got to understand what you're saying to that client and how they're responding to the things that you're saying. I remember actually, just sort of pursuing that one, I remember being in the States in the late 70s when I was still at TBWA, and we were helping establish the agency there then. And I can always remember it. We made this pitch to the Quaker Company, and a couple of their people had come in, very senior people, and we showed a reel of work. It was a rather good reel of work, obviously from Europe, because we hadn't been really established in America. And it was this great moment when, we played the reel, sat back, and the client looked at it and went, He said, yeah. He said, that's very creative, that. And when somebody's saying something like that, you're in for trouble. And his great line was, that's very creative, that. That went out in the 60s, which, there is no answer to creativity went out in the 60s. It's all over, The other thing that I always feel that, when somebody's coming in and you're pitching, again, I try not to make it about the advertising. I try to make it about something bigger than that. And, I always think that you're selling the future. And I think in a way our industry, one of the things that's really exciting about advertising, one of the things I love about it, is that it is about the future. It is kind of, what's happening, what's going to be on tomorrow, what are we going to do, where are we going to go, what's the latest thing. And that is very exciting. Of course, there is a danger in that, which I'll come on to. But I think you've got to make that client feel that relationship with this group of people is really going to be very, very interesting. And whatever you do, in that way, you're not just selling an advertising solution. And I think, when we pitched for Johnny Walker back in 2000, we sort of thought, well, what can we do for this company? Whiskey's going downhill, nobody's buying it anymore, da-da-da-da-da. And here was a brilliant piece of strategic thinking. And it was Nick Kendall who came and said to me, he said, John, the problem with whiskey is it's always selling success as a place. It's a place. So it's a penthouse, or it's a fantastic yacht in Monaco, or what it is, the usual crap that advertising does. And he says, success isn't a place. Success is a journey. True people never arrive. And with that simple thought, we got to keep walking. Bang! In about 15 minutes. Now, here was a brand called Johnny Walker. been that for about 150 years, had a striding man as their logo, had that for about 100 years, had never got to keep walking because nobody had strategically said, this is what the problem is. So my point there is, it's a lottery. What you've got to do is change the rules. You've got to change the rules. You mustn't play on everybody else's pitch. If you're playing on everybody else's pitch, you'll be judged like everybody else. And there you've lessened your odds. So what you've got to do is move them off that place onto this place. Fundamentally important, that. And that's when I go, you know, our industry is obsessed with the future. You know, it's like, what's tomorrow? What's happening? That's what, you know, it just, you know, that's, but actually, history is fundamentally important. I have been more successful more times with brands because they basically have come to us because there's a problem. They don't come to us because, hey, everything's really great, we want to change agencies. No, they come to you because there's a problem. And I've basically just gone back into their history and said, so when did it go wrong? When did this start going wrong? And of course, you know, history isn't about the past, it's about the future, which is a great line that was given to me by my history master at the age of 12, which I've always remembered. Great way of teaching history. And it's so true about brands today. Their history isn't in the past, it's about the future, it's about where you go. And I think actually there's a sort of small point there in our business too, because we're so obsessed with tomorrow, so obsessed with the next thing. We don't know enough about what we did do before. Our history is very important, the history of what brands have done, where they've come from, the communications that they did are absolutely crucial, and we should know more about that. So I kind of feel that, you know, this, as I say to you, pitching is this crucial thing that we do when the adrenaline of the agency comes to the fore. I think you've got to kind of remember that, you know, you start winning a pitch before they walk through the door. The work you produce, the things you believe in, are all those things which are going to get people to buy into you. You can't please everyone. Don't try and do it. A fundamental mistake. And I think the other thing that I'm going to say is this, and it's something that I'm kind of, it's serve the best coffee in the world. And I'm going to say this for a couple of reasons, actually. And it was a colleague who left us, and she'd gone to another group of companies. And she was organizing a pitch. And she said to me, I've got the brightest people in that company to attend this pitch. And we went round to 4 agencies. We did this, saw all these presentations, and 2 days after all the pitches, I got everybody back and said, right, you know, now who would you like to go with? What did you think? And she said they spent about half an hour talking about the state of reception in various agencies, the coffee that one agency served, which was truly awful. And she said it took me about half an hour to get them to talk about the presentations. And we go straight past those things because we do it every day. We walk into it. We don't think about those things. We don't think about the theatre of pitching, why you should do the certain things that you should do. And we have a man on our ground floor reception called Victor. And Victor is one of the finest new business winners we've got. He's receptionist on the ground floor, welcomes you in. And Victor makes sure he knows everybody's name. He knows who's coming in. He knows where they are in that company. And he's got their badges prepared for them. So when they walk in and say, I'm from whatever, he says, of course, Mr. So-and-so, great to see you here at BBH. Here's your badge. I think Victor's won us more business than all our creative work put together. And that is, we walk past that, and this is what this friend said. We walk past these obvious things. We don't think about it. And the other reason I say serve the best coffee in the world, and I'm sort of obsessed with quality. I'm obsessed with things being great. And I don't see how in a company you can be great at one thing and rubbish at another. So I don't see how you can come into BBH and for us to sit down and go, you know, we're the best ad agency in the world. Our creativity, we're number one, blah, blah, blah. And then serve shit coffee. How can you do that? It just seems to me odd. It just seems to me absolutely peculiar. And I remember a long time ago meeting Ron Dennis of McLaren. And we went down there. We were doing something for him. And we went down to his place down in, I think it's in Surrey or Sussex, like that. And for the first half hour, Ron Dennis talked about the food he served in the cafe. And he said, this is the best food in the whole of the region. And he said, because I want the best people. And that belief in quality, that belief in being great at everything. You can't be great at some things and not others. You've got to be great at everything. Thank you very much.